What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we've got the final twid before Season of the Wish drops, and this Bungie Weekly update is coming a little bit early ahead of Thanksgiving on Thursday. I hope you guys have a great time if you're celebrating this week, by the way, but in the Destiny news, Bungie give us details about ability tuning for the new season. That includes Stasis, which is seeing some reworks next week, as well as factoring into the artifact for Season of the Wish, so we'll cover the news on that front, plus Bungie have details on exotic armor tuning, a few launch notes for the season, and some other things to cover in the update. So we'll round it all up right here, guys. Be sure to get subscribed to the channel if you're new around here, but without further delay, let's get into it. And firstly in the twid, as we covered earlier this week, Bungie have revealed that we're going to see a Witcher-inspired collaboration for Season 23, with new themed armor right here, and it certainly looks pretty cool. As always though, these armor sets are likely to be Eververse purchases as opposed to gameplay rewards, but I guess that isn't anything new, and so let us know if you plan to pick up this armor down in the comment section. Moving into the twid though, Bungie do talk about the LFG system that's going to be launching in Season 23. And of course earlier today they announced that they will be doing a beta for in-game LFG as opposed to a full launch. So if you want extra details on that, I'll link the blog post down below. And I also have a video rounding it up from earlier today. But next up we get a preview of the new artifact for Season 23. And this is the Queen's Foil Center. So pretty cool design for the thing right there, but also, as always, to give us a preview of the mods that we'll be able to get. This is an absolutely massive chart that's pretty difficult to display on screen, but in the first column we're going to get anti-barrier sidearm, unstoppable hand cannon, unstoppable bow, and then we'll see overload auto rifles and pulse rifles. Then for column 2, there is flame, fiber, and freeze, which combines the solar strand and solar stasis siphon mods into one. But there's also kindling trigger, and radiant causes solar weapons to apply scorch to unscorched combatants, as well as blast radius and rapid final blows with rocket launchers and grenade launchers grant armor charge. And then there's Origin Perk Specialization 1, which improves the benefit provided by sundering nanomunitions and nanotech tracer rockets traits. And finally, From Whence You Came, which increases ability damage to Taken and Scorn combatants. So obviously plenty of Taken and Scorn in Season of the Wish. But otherwise, in terms of new perks, we've got Flint Striker, and Rapid Solar Weapon Precision Hits and Rapid Solar Weapon Final Blows will grant Radiant. Torch, and while Radiant, deal increased weapon damage to combatants affected by Strand and Stasis debuffs. And then Heart of Flame, and casting your Solar Super grants nearby allies Radiant and increases the damage of the Super for a nearby ally. But there's also Wished into Being, and while your super is nearly fully charged, ability final blows spawn orbs of power, and wearing Season of the Wish armor will decrease the super amount threshold, which is interesting. And then we've got Unraveling Orbs, where picking up an orb of power grants strand weapons unraveling rounds. Pillar of Ice, and killing an encased combatant spawns stasis crystals. But there's also Revitalizing Blast, where causing damage with the solar ability weakens champions and bosses for a short duration. Plus we'll see Overload rocket launchers and Dragon's Bite, where breaking a combatant's shield with a strand or stasis weapon has a chance to suspend or freeze that combatant, and wearing Season of the Wish armor increases the chance. Then for the final column of made mods here, we've got Horde Shuffle, and damaging unravel targets with a weapon occasionally spawns a Threadling. There's also Hail the Storm, and shattering encased targets and stasis crystals deals increased damage, and shattering a stasis crystal releases shards of ice that damage and slow targets. But we also have Rays of Precision, and while Radiant, Solar Precision Final Blows cause combatants to ignite. And then there's Solo Operative, and when you're the only member of the fire team, you deal increased damage to all combatants. And finally, Argent Ordnance, and firing a rocket launcher consumes 1 stack of armor charge, which grants increased damage and reload speed until you reload or stow the rocket launcher. So those are the new artifact mods right there, some pretty decent sounding ones. I especially like some of the new bonuses, but give us your thoughts down below. Up next though, we get onto ability tuning. And firstly, a bunch of changes for things in the game already. They point out that it took a stab at Woven Mail's PvE damage reduction previously, but they say with the update next week in Season 23, they're reducing it by a further 10%. And while it's a relatively small change, we want to evaluate it alongside some changes to Banner of War. So damage resistance versus PvE combatants goes from 55% to 45% from Woven Mail. Of course, it's a pretty strong perk, so not really surprising that it's one Bungie would want to target. They also say that Restoration's heal rate is being reduced in both PvE and PvP. And so for Restoration, they've reduced the healing rate at Restoration ×1, which was previously 40 health points a second in PvE, and will now be 35 health points per second. And for PvP, that was 20 health points per second previously, and now will be 17.5 health points points a second. Then the healing rate at restoration ×2 goes from 65 in PvE to 50, and from 32.5 in PvP to 25. And so it's definitely a small knock to the restoration heal rate there. Give us your thoughts below. And they say lastly, there are also changes for Devour, and the healing amount, both on activation and when refreshed, will be reduced from a full heal to 100 health points unless Feed the Void is equipped. But it now refills both health and shield sections more smoothly, rather than adding health to each section separately. And finally, for Feed the Void, they've increased grenade energy regeneration per kill while Devour is active, and the amount varies based on the type of target defeated, but it now also improves the strength of Devour's heal when equipped. And so there'll be some mixed feelings about those ones. It isn't necessarily a time when we want to hear about nerfs, I guess, but there will be a few different opinions out there, so let us know what you think down below. They're also taking another stab at sprint and slide activation, and they say sprint and slide activated melees can no longer be activated after the player fires their weapon during a slide, and that will affect Seismic Strike, Shield Bash, Hammer Strike, Howl of the Storm, Consecration, Fletchered Storm, and then Lightning Surge and Tempest Strike. And they say alongside this change, they're also increasing the potency of Tempest Strike, and they've increased base damage from 110 to 125, reworked the tracking behavior to be more consistent at longer ranges, and improved consistency when traveling over rough terrain. But we get into more adjustments of a similar ilk right here, and they say they're making a change to slow down charge progression, and that includes Banner of War, and they've increased the number of enemy defeats necessary to level up the banner by approximately double, as well as increasing the amount of time added per enemy defeat at each level to compensate. They do say though the values vary depending on the type of target defeated, and so it won't be so easy to proc Banner of War and get it active now. But also for Titans, there'll be changes to Throwing Hammer, and they say when picked up it now returns melee energy over 1.4 seconds rather than instantly, but they have increased the projectile tracking strength by about 20%, so an interesting change right there returning melee energy. But also for Sol Invictus, they've reduced the maximum sunspot duration from 20 seconds to 12 seconds, and they say the duration is only ever reached when the player is standing inside of the sunspot, and the duration without the owner standing inside remains unchanged at 5 seconds. But then we get onto Well of Radiance and Ward of Dawn, and they say for both of them they're increasing the base cooldown time from 417 seconds to 455, so those aren't going to be up as much now. And so overall some of the stronger supers, Well of Radiance, Ward of Dawn, but also things like Banner of War and Woven Mail, are all getting those somewhat predictable nerfs, and some of them of course are things that Bungie have taken a pass at numerous different times, so let us know what you think about them down below. But here they do finally talk about the Stasis changes, and they say they're making a number of quality of life changes to improve reliability in combat. And so for Season of the Wish, they're looking at the fragments, and for Whisper of Hedrons, they say they're removing the -10 strength penalty. Then for Whisper of Impetus, it now provides +10 resilience. Whisper of Shards will no longer provide +10 resilience though. And for Whisper of Hunger, the stat penalty is changing from -10 mobility and -10 intellect to -20 strength. And then we have Whisper of Bonds, where they're removing -10 discipline penalties. So a few adjustments right there to some of the fragments, but they say for Hunters and Withering Blade, they're increasing the projectile speed by 10%, as well as increasing the maximum projectile lifetime by 10%, and increasing the maximum bounce count from 2 to 3, as well as increasing tracking consistency. So hopefully that one's going to be a good bit better. There's also Winter Shroud here, where they're increasing slow stacks applied to PvE combatants from 40 to 60, as well as increasing the slow duration applied to PvE combatants from 4 seconds to 8 seconds, and increasing that slow detonation size versus PvE combatants from 8 meters to 9 meters. So a couple of positives there, and they say finally for Titans, they're walking back a few changes made in hotfixes 3.1.1.1 and 3.2.0.3, as they feel that Shiver Strike and Glacial Quake no longer fit the current sandbox. So for Shiver Strike, it now slows players on hit, which is a behavior that they previously removed, but they also fixed an issue where Shiver Strike would not function with the melee kickstyle armor mod. And then for Glacial Quake, it now freezes nearby players on cast, a behavior that was previously removed in another hotfix. And the on-cast freeze impulse size versus players has been reduced from 8 meters to 6 meters. So another little bit of quality of life for those. On top of that though, they say they're implementing a change to improve Howl of Storm's consistency against players. So they fixed an issue where Howl of Storm was not consistently freezing targets in contact with stasis crystals. They additionally say though that they're making a couple of quality of life improvements to Frost Pulse and Penumbral Blast for Warlocks. So for Frost Pulse, they're significantly increasing the consistency against fast moving targets, but also the freeze detonation size versus PvE combatants increases from 8 meters to 8.5. And then for Penumbral Blast, they're increasing the detonation size when impacting the environment from 1.5 meters to 2 meters. And then they move on to some stasis grenades here, and they say for the Glacier Grenade, they're reducing the base cooldown time from 152 to 121 seconds. And also the cooldown penalties for Duskfield Grenade and Cold Snap when Bleak Watcher is equipped have been updated, so that the cooldown times match the new Glacier Grenade cooldown. Then there is Cold Snap, and they say they fixed an issue where the Seeker wasn't consistently created in the direction the projectile was moving after a bounce. Plus they increased the arming shape size from 0.9 to 1.4 meters, and tracking strength will now ramp down from full strength at 0 over the course of the grenade's lifetime, rather than immediately turning off after the Seeker has reached 0.5 seconds of lifetime. So some interesting stuff to get our heads around here, but they say finally we're increasing the bonus damage that special weapons deal to frozen targets by a small amount. And so special ammo weapon damage versus frozen targets goes from 5% to 10%. But they do say in the future they'll be looking at a new stasis keyword called Frost Armor, which is aimed at addressing some player feedback regarding survivability when running stasis. Plus there'll be additional tuning changes and reworks to existing fragments, as well as additional behaviour for harvest aspects. And so a bunch of interesting changes there for stasis. Mainly, it feels like sort of minor adjustments and quality of life stuff. But you'll have to give us your thoughts down in the comments section. And finally, they do talk about exotic armour changes. So initially, we've got Hunters here, and for Shards of Galanor, they say Throwing Knife kills now grant super energy ranging between plus 2.5 and 5% depending on the type of enemy killed. Then there is the Ophidia Spathe, where knife kills now grant a stacking damage bonus, which is plus 30, 60, or 100 for 5 seconds. On throwing knives, and dodging will refresh the duration. And then for Stompies, they say they're removing the requirement to have full class ability energy to benefit from the movement bonuses. They're also reducing the airborne lateral acceleration bonus, and it now provides damage resistance against combatants while airborne. And of course, some of these updates we have heard about previously when Bungie accidentally leaked new descriptions for these exotics. But there's also Mechaneer Trick Sleeves, and the sidearm damage bonus now persists for 5 seconds after your shields begin to recharge. Plus, sidearm kills extend the damage bonus duration by 3 seconds and completely reload sidearms from reserves. And then the damage bonus has been reduced in PvP to compensate for it lasting longer, and it's now 10% sidearm damage going down from 35%. And then for Bombardiers, it applies 20 slow stacks to enemy players and 40 slow stacks to PvE combatants. Plus, Triton Vice will see increased glaive melee damage bonuses while surrounded to 100% for both PvE and PvP, and that's up from just 30% in PvE before, so that's actually a pretty big change. And then with Celestial Nighthawk, precision kills now grant super energy ranging between 1.5 and 4.5% depending on the type of target killed. So those are the Hunter changes, let us know what you think. We get onto Titans here though, and for Severance Enclosure, they've increased the size and damage of the explosion. Plus, kills with the Exotic's explosion will now trigger an additional explosion. There's also the change to Peregrine Greaves, where you now have to be airborne for a brief time before the exotic effects will apply, but damaging champions, tormentors, or mini-bosses with a shoulder charge deals further increased damage and refunds melee energy. They also say the Burning Fist exotic effect has been reworked on the Wormguard Caress, and the meter is broken up into 5 sections that provide escalating melee and glaive melee damage bonuses. The upper end of the meter now also provides escalating weapon damage bonuses, but as the meter decays, it passes back through earlier tiers rather than deactivating immediately, and the meter decays more quickly the more full it is. For Ashen Wake though, they're adding the ability for it to stun unstoppable champions with fusion grenade impacts. And for the Syntheseps, they've removed the extended melee lunge distance, but it improves weapon handling and reload speed while surrounded, and they've reduced the PvE surrounding melee damage bonus to 165% from 200%, but it increases glaive melee damage bonuses to plus 100 instead of plus 50. Finally though, there's Precious Scars, and kills with weapons matching the subclass now apply Restoration Tier 1 for 1.5 seconds in PvP and 3 seconds in PvE. And then we get on to Warlocks, and for the Balador's Wrathweavers, they say now when you cast a Frostpulse Rift, nearby allies gain a tier 2 Stasis Surge weapon bonus for 10 seconds in PvE and 5 seconds in PvP, plus they gain a 50 health point overshield. On top of that though, they say the stasis damage bonus provided to allies by the Winter's Wrath Shockwave is now the tier 4 Stasis Surge weapon bonus, and when Winter's Wrath ends, you gain the tier 4 Stasis Surge weapon bonus as well. So that's an interesting one, but we've got Apotheosis Veil here, and casting Super now grants Cure tier 3 for you and nearby allies, and after the Super ends, you now temporarily gain increased melee and grenade regen for 8 seconds. Plus there's Felwinter's Helm, and they've moved the size of the weakening burst and duration of Weaken up 1 tier against all targets except for finishers against bosses, which retains the maximum size and duration. And finally for Karnstein Armlets, melee kills now grant Cure tier 3 and Restoration tier 1 for 8 seconds, with finishers granting Cure tier 3 and Restoration tier 2 for 8 seconds. And so let us know what you think of the exotic armor changes right there, guys. I think on the most part they do sound beneficial and broadly positive, but finally in the twit there are armor mod changes, and for heavy-handed, firepower and Reaper, they say they now have a 10-second cooldown for generating an orb of power. Plus, Reaper also requires a kill to be secured within 10 seconds of using a class ability. Then for melee kickstart, grenade and utility kickstart, it now provides between plus 16 and 45% ability energy and requires at least a single armor charge to be consumed. And then momentum transfer, bolstering detonation, impact induction and focusing strike now provide 12, 17 and 20% ability energy for 1, 2 and 3 stacks respectively and require a powered melee attack. So some of these are being toned down quite a bit. Plus there's Outreach and Bomber, which now provides 12, 17 and 20% ability energy for 1, 2 and 3 stacks respectively. And on top of that, they say Outreach and Bomber now provides 12%, 17 and 20% ability energy, with Distribution providing 4, 6 and 7% ability energy. And energy provided is further reduced based on the cooldown of the class ability used, with the shortest cooldowns reducing it by 60%. So again, some of the potent armor mods right there are being toned back, and they feel like they're still along the same lines as when Bungie are looking at things like Banner of War and Woven Mail, where they clearly feel that potency is a bit much. So a mixed bag of changes right there. There'll certainly be a bunch of opinions on the adjustments in this update, so let us know what you think down below. As always, I think there are some positives there. The new artifact stuff is looking decent, and we're going to see the beginnings of solid stasis improvements. But give us your thoughts down in the comment section, and for today guys, that's what we have to round up in the video. So as always, I hope this one has been useful, and if it has, a rating below really does help us out on the channel. Also be sure to get subscribed for more Destiny content, but otherwise, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.